Hello, everyone, and welcome again to Painless Universal, a conversation with myself, Anne Welsh. If you've not been following us, please follow our page at Painless Universal, where you learn all about our conversation and ways you could help others who are going through pain and finding their joy. Today's amazing conversation is with Rachel Dolezal. What's amazing about her is that she's been through her own journey. We've previously had a conversation with her where we talked about her own struggle, what actually happened during her difficult time, how she, dealt with it. We talked about her book. Today's conversation is really on a different note. We're talking to Rachel about who she is today. What has life taught her, and how is she helping others who've gone through similar pain? Rachel's an artist, she's an author, and she's a mother, most importantly. We're talking about her child who has autism. What is she doing to help him and raise the awareness about the issue? Her dolls, she just released these amazing, wonderful dolls that tells a story of diversity and inclusion. How you use dolls to just tell stories, help little girls to understand what diversity and what inclusion is all about. I'm super excited that she's taking the time out of her busy schedule to speak to us today. Rachel will be talking about all that she's doing and also giving us key advice on how we could live in this world that is also filled with pain. People just hating you because of their own hates or their own pain, and how she's using it, those difficult times in her life, how she's using it now to help others. Meet my amazing guest, Rachel, as she continues her story. If you haven't watched her part one, go see the first episode where we talked about her book. This episode is really about finding your joy again. Meet Rachel. Well, hello everyone, and welcome again to Painless Universal Conversation with myself, Anne Welsh. Today's conversation is really a revisit of our previous conversation. If you've missed it, you can watch our first episode with Rachel, where we talked about her own journey and dealing with difficult circumstances that led to pain, and how she found her joy from that circumstance. Today, we'll be talking more differently. We're taking a different path about who Rachel is today. What has she been doing? The pandemic has changed so many of us, it's changed our views on the way we view life. Rachel has so many exciting things she wants to share with us, and we're so excited that we've been able to get Rachel to sit down with us again to tell us her journey. Who is she today, and how is she bringing joy to so many others who might be victims of the similar things she went through before, and how she's finding her joy again. Hi, Rachel. How are you?
I'm doing well. Yeah, good to see your smiling face again. It's been a minute.
I know. I was hoping that, and then I think last time we talked, we were just right in the middle of the pandemic. And I was just hoping I probably would have come out there to come see you guys, but it hasn't happened because this pandemic, things are gradually opening up in here in United Kingdom. Not quite sure how it is over there where you are, whether the travel is back again.
Travel is back. Actually, Australia opened up for student visas. So my oldest son finally got to go to Australia for law school. So he's there. He had to wait a while because of the pandemic, to get to Sydney Law, but he's there. And but even though things are open in the US, there still are little pockets and waves of COVID happening. And my youngest son actually was hospitalized just a few weeks ago with COVID, not necessarily due to COVID complications, but because he has autism and is nonverbal. It's very hard for him to communicate about medical symptoms.
Yes.
So he was refusing food for a number of days and was just declining to the point where I had to take him in and get him, IV'd, and they had to get his levels back up so that he could come home and finish recuperating. But I think he probably lost his taste and smell, and that was connected with why he was refusing food. But again, it was really difficult to tell because he doesn't talk. So so that was definitely a stressful time as a mother. And certainly you said, how do I see myself today. And you know, being
Yeah.
a mom is really the main the main role that I feel like I play, you know, with my three sons, being at the forefront of my mind and of my attention and focus. So, you know, being a mother, being an artist, still being an activist, more for international human rights than for, you know, activities or causes within the U.S. These days. But on the same, I still have human. Yeah, so an art activist and mother kind of am today.
No, honestly, I'm so honored that we had this opportunity to get to talk again, because your work was really powerful. You changed the way organizations were empowering Black people. You really gave it your all best shot. And even when we look back at 2015, when all the incident happened, we, you know, anyone who's watching the video could watch it back and see the previous conversation. You're looking back now, because you know everything is, it's been 7 years now. When you look back at things now, how do you see yourself? How do you see, if this is to happen again, what would you have done differently?
Yeah, I looking back on it, I definitely see the same person in some senses of just the continuity of my life. I'm still me, you know, then and now. I feel like what really changed was how I was perceived. And I know that, you know, reputation is kind of how people see you, but character is really who you are. And so in a sense, I feel like my character has not shifted. I'm still the same person. I don't necessarily think that I could have done anything to prevent a lot of the misunderstandings and the chaos that happened in 2015. So you know, I don't feel guilty for it or feel like there's something I should have done differently, you know, in a moment. But I do regret that there was so much just destruction that was caused back then, you know?
Yeah.
And I, moving forward now, you know, 7 years later, it's just so important for me to stay focused on my goals, my three sons' goals, and the causes of human rights that I so deeply care about, because that's, you know, what gives me life and what gives me joy moving forward. And if I stay focused on the the media frenzy back in 2015 and all the misunderstandings that people still, you know, it still percolates. I still hear from people, and sometimes it does, you know, make a day a little rougher, a little bit harder to stay focused on the future. It kind of gets me down sometimes. But if I dwell on it, I feel like it's kind of, you know, it pulls me back into depression and into some of that pain. So I, you know, I really found it useful to just stay focused on, you know, moving forward and um, not not necessarily focusing on the pain, you know, because you can only get so far. And I feel like I have addressed everything that I could address with regards to that particular, what caused the pain. And then now, you know, I've got to be able to heal and focus on the future. So it's been definitely a journey, and even focusing on my own health has been part of that. I was diagnosed with an autoimmune condition, Hashimoto's, and that basically was affecting my thyroid. So I have hypothyroidism, which was affecting my weight and a lot of things during that time. I just didn't really know what was going on, but that's caused by chronic stress and trauma. So I'm kind of, you know, I'm recommitting to not living with chronic stress and trauma, you know, not reliving and reliving and reliving all of the stuff of the past, you know, whether it was my abusive childhood, whether it was, you know, my abusive marriage, whether it was the situations that happened in 2015. I mean, all that stuff, I've dealt with it. I've faced it. It's not like I ignored anything, but now moving forward, you know, I can't dwell on that pain. I have to focus on it. And I think I read an article that, you know, if your toe is in a lot of pain, if you focus on what your hands can do, your brain literally sends signals, you know, to your hands. And so it divides, it actually makes your toe hurt less, if you're
Oh,
focused on another body part.
yeah.
So because your brain is going to send those things. And I think it's similar for emotional and psychological pain, in that if we can focus on what we can do, or what, another part of our life, or moving more forward than looking in the rearview mirror, I think it does help to really find our joy and be more healthy as well, with in a physical sense even. So that's kind of, what I've been doing. And I've also been sharing my fitness journey on my OnlyFans. So I've been, really working out a lot, staying active, and I have to eat a certain selective diet just because of my thyroid issues. And but I've found a little rhythm and some things that work, and so I've tried to share that so that others maybe who are struggling with something similar can find a path, or a method that works for them.
I like that. I've seen some of your fitness video on Instagram, and that motivates me, because sometimes I really, really do not want to even think about working out. And I go to your page and I see you. I scroll through some of your workouts. I'm like, oh gosh, if she can do it, I better get myself together, because it's just not. It's not just keeping losing weight, it's also the keeping fit, it's also the mental stability when you go to the gym, how you look and feel. When you look back in 2015, and so many people have gone through that same similar pain, you've seen what's happened in the world. Sometimes when things happen to us, we think it's just us, but we're not realizing that quite a lot of people have been through that pain since 2015. What kind of advice do you give to people when they approach you and say, look, Rachel, I'm going through this thing. Someone just said this about me and I'm not happy the way it came out. What would you say to someone in that pain?
I would definitely recommend at least what worked for me. And I know, definitely, first of all, I recommend do what works for you. But what worked for me, if I can share that, is just to really dig deep inside of myself and to separate, be able to analyze what part of this is me versus what part of this is someone else's issues. And a lot of times when people say things about us, or attack us or whatever, it's coming from a place of their pain, and it's really more reflective on what they're dealing with and their identity, or their way of making sense of the world. And so it serves them to attack us because it somehow makes maybe them feel a little bit more secure in their, their analysis, or kind of format of how they view things. And so I have empathy for, and I think a lot of people said, oh, you should have just stood up for yourself, or you should have fought back and attacked. And I said, no, because a lot of times people were just venting their frustrations about the race issue, or about identity, how they view identity. It wasn't really even about me, on a personal level. So I think my advice would be to try to take a step back and don't take it personally, because a lot of times people are just discussing the topic, and there's a lot of pain around the topic of race historically, and even to this day, lots of pain. And I think that it's important to acknowledge that pain and to hear it and let it be said, and so not to interrupt or attack back or whatever, because that's more of a that if somebody was attacking me as a mother, I might feel differently than if somebody's attacking me over a broader issue or topic. And, if somebody attacks one of our kids, we know that we're like, oh, that's when it's hard to get a little more rational about things. Right. So, but I think to take a step back and really kind of separate, is this what this person's saying? Is it really about me, or is it just more about them and what they need to express and how they feel? And can this serve, to move that energy, to allow that venting and even dialogue to happen might serve a greater purpose in, you know, in society or in humanity. And so, that's been helpful to me, to, realize that it's not really about me.
And how did you find a new path? Because looking at you now, you seem so happy and you seem so composed. A lot of people will struggle to get themselves, especially when it's so public. And, the thing you dealt with was so public. How did you find it in you to find that joy again? What did you do differently? That because I want to share that secret with the rest of the world because you look amazing. What did you do?
So much of my career and still a lot of my passions are focused on helping others. And that's still super important to me. But I think in that moment of dealing with my own pain, I really had to love myself and to take my health seriously, to take the steps. And it was really hard because I was always a giver and I didn't really feel like it was even morally admirable at all to do something for myself. Self-care, I just thought that was silly.
Yeah.
So I learned how to nurture myself like I nurture my kids. And I think to just think of, with my autoimmune condition, for example, I have to eat I can't have dairy, I can't have gluten, I can't have sugar, I can't have all these different things, right? So I have to cook a very different way. And I thought, oh, there's no, I don't even care. I'm not even going to do that. I'm just going to, eat raw materials, some raw vegetables, whatever. But then I thought, if this was one of my sons, right, that had a specific dietary restrictive palate or need medically, I would cook for him. I would cook the best food. I would, nurture him through the food that he could have. And so really that revelation of why am I not nurturing myself like I would nurture one of my kids? And that was kind of a wake-up call for me. And in a sense, it's kind of a full circle, right? Because if I take care of my health and my joy, then I'm also being a better mother too. I'm able to be a better mother to them as well. But it's actually being willing to do that just for the sake of valuing myself and nurturing my own being, my own needs. So it's been a long process.
No, but
I almost feel kind of silly because I feel like it's just so obvious. A lot of people do self-care and whatever, but I just thought I don't have time for that. There are people that have greater needs in the world, and I need to focus my time and energy on those things. And that is true, but it's also true that if you are not, taking care of your own health and happiness, then you don't have much to give,
And that is an absolute, because I always say this from a point of when you're on the plane, the first thing they will say to you in the plane is put your own oxygen mask first before you put your kids one on. And that always sits with me. And also when I was little in hospital, I just realized at an early age, when you're not well, there's just no energy to give anyone. Not even, no matter how much you love your child or love anyone around you, there's just no energy because you're there like a lump sitting there. So I always say to people, the sooner you realize that it's you first, because when you're better, when you're well, then you could give everyone else what they really truly desire, and it's much easier. And I agree with you with what you said about your sons, is that when the kids are well, you do anything, you actually forget yourself, not realizing that whatever that thing, same love you're giving to them, it's also quite essential to give that same love back to yourself. When you look at yourself now, you are doing so much. It's so amazing to see how much you've learned from everything, and you've moved on, and you've utilized this to move on a different path, on helping others in a bigger way. You're now helping people in South Africa. Can you tell me about that journey, what you're doing in South Africa?
Yeah. So I actually went to South Africa for the first time to speak back in 2017 after my book came out. And I was there for 17 days and really bonded with, I lived with or stayed with for those 17 days, a Khoisan family, and was there with Langston as well. He was just little. And Isaiah was actually doing study abroad in South Africa. So I kind of combined it as a trip to visit him as well. He was in Stellenbosch. But anyway, the purpose of that visit was to meet with the thinking masses of South Africa, which is a group that really is working to develop a non-racial South African society, because so many of the apartheid oppressions that were under those, categories of Black and white and, in between being what they call colored or Cape colored, being like this tier, this hierarchy of oppression, right? So Afrikaans being at the top, like similar to Jim Crow, where white was at the top in the US. And so that has, even though apartheid has ended, a lot of those oppressions have remained systemic and institutionalized. And so to fight for a non-racial South African society, this group, sees it as important because, as the Khoisan say, Khoisan forever, colored never, in terms of, what the label that was given to that group was not anything that described them. It was just part of this oppression. And so instead of just being seen as Black or white or mixed, it's like, well, what is your tribe? What is your culture? So Zulu is very different from Khoisan, very different from Xhosa, very different, so there are all of these different cultures, and to be able to have an identity that expresses a culture as opposed to a color or a rung on the apartheid ladder is very important, because that is not race, that's culture, so there's a big difference. So anyway, I was speaking with them, and we did some presentations and some different workshops at a couple of universities, and that has grown into actually the family that I lived with or stayed with at that time became godparents to Langston, my youngest son, and so they have been in touch, and visit him from time to time, and that's been amazing. But also working with other groups and initiatives. There's an initiative now to hopefully campaign for the first Black female president in South Africa, and also some initiatives for land ownership for the Khoisan people to reclaim the land that was rightfully, this is one of the oldest tribes in the entire continent, and to have their land stripped away and colonized, and to now be in a situation of poverty, even post-apartheid, and not to have land ownership is an injustice. And so I'm working with an organization there to hopefully develop programs that will lead to greater land ownership. And I'm really excited about that, because I think it's something that is so important, especially now that there's even neo-colonialism being, China is buying up land now, so it's like European countries, and now, China and other countries are buying up land across the continent. And, for the people that have been there forever, that arguably are all of our ancestors, we all go back to the continent of Africa eventually, and in the human race. And so to uplift people in that sense just means so much to me.
That's truly fascinating. I just have thought about this, because racism in South Africa is very different from racism in America. And I can't describe both, because I've not lived in either one of the places. I've visited both of them, but I've not lived there. When you talk to these people, this is something you're very interested in. You've worked in these spaces. when you look at what people are saying in the United States, the blacks, and when you look at what people are saying in South Africa, how do you compare what this pain both each of them is going through, and how would you advise both them from what you've seen to overcome that pain?
Well, I think in terms of like land ownership, that's a specific thing for the Khoisan people that wouldn't necessarily be something. It would be more of a Native American issue here in the U.S., right? Indigenous people here owning, the land that they had before the colonizers arrived. But I think in the Black communities here, there's still that need to overcome the historic oppression. I mean, for my sons, there's so many ways in which they have to navigate racism from very young ages in school, even kindergarten on through college. There's so many ways in the education system and in policing. And there was a report just yesterday that came out of Minneapolis. The Minnesota Human Rights Commission had been evaluating since 2020 in the case of George Floyd. It kind of sparked this evaluation of the Minneapolis Police Department, right? And they did this deep dive and investigation and did ride-alongs and did all this research, very similar to the work that I did in Spokane, Washington, doing ride-alongs with the police and, trying to understand how do we reform policing? How do we make it safer for our kids, especially our Black sons? And they found, their findings were that there was in fact, which of course a lot of people already knew in theory or believed, but the documentation was important to have, that they found disproportionalities in traffic stops and use of force, especially chemical irritants and chokeholds. They found disproportionalities even in terms of like accountability of officers when interacting with Black community members versus white community members. And they even found that the officers, even when it wasn't even, that there were no investigations pending or anything, but the officers were actually engaging in covert operations to pose as Black community members on social media and then attack the local NAACP or make complaints about different things to undermine Black organizations and even to interact with Black individuals online. And it wasn't even part of an investigation, which was in opposition to what their supposed policy was. But anyway, just to say that there are so many different levels of racism that were exposed in this report that is indicative of not just Minneapolis, but of so many different cities across America. And so I think that in America, there's a lot of fatigue of dealing with racism and fighting for justice because it takes so long. The system here is very bureaucratic, and we still haven't passed the Justice and Policing George Floyd bill, which Biden promised to pass, or make law. Still hasn't been made law. And that's, so it just takes so long that people kind of lose their attention span. And so I think that those of us who've been activists for decades know that you have to really dig in and you have to have a long-term goal and you have to work strategically from within the system. I mean, hopefully they don't kick you out of the system like what happened with my work, my leadership. But, a lot of times that happens where the police department was following me with private investigators, similar to, the Minneapolis report sounded so familiar with the MPD doing these covert operations to tear down Black leaders and people fighting for the Black community. And so a lot of times that happens. And if that happens, you've got to just pick up the pieces and do what you can, but meanwhile, I think that there's a lot of complexity here in America. And I know more about this scene than I do the South Africa one as far as living in it and raising my kids here. Yeah. But in South Africa, not just land ownership, but also poverty, the class issue is huge. And there are, of course, the ANC has their structure. I think right now it's led by a figurehead who doesn't necessarily seem to have the people's interest at heart. And so that's always sad. You know, sometimes there's a sense of almost copying the what would be deemed the colonizers' tactics, you know, to almost in a sense, sometimes if someone perpetrates an oppression towards you, then it seems empowering to kind of, you know, take on that style of leadership and to then be able to have the authority to maybe oppress others and not necessarily to remember that you were once the oppressed, you know, and to have that compassion, that empathy. So that's kind of what I'm really working toward in the political sense there. To, you know, I think a woman would lead much differently, and a woman with the heart and compassion for the people for sure. But I also think that, you know, in terms of the land ownership and the class issue, the economic issues, those struggles and those challenges are definitely ongoing. And it's more recent, you know, because, you know, in February, I was talking to 2 different school groups doing Black history presentations, and we were all focused on African history. So that was what I was invited to the schools to talk about Black history in terms of human history and our common, you know, African history. But talking about the different timelines really points to, you know, a lot of countries across the continent of Africa gained independence relatively recently. You know, this is, you know, 60 years ago or whatever, you know, less than a century ago. Whereas in America, it's been a century and a half since the Emancipation Proclamation and slavery ending. But also, you know, the fight for civil rights took some time and so forth. But it just seems like the timelines really matter because, again, the farther away from the oppression you get, sometimes the more complex, but also hopefully, fingers crossed, the more progress is made. But sometimes it just kind of becomes more complex if the issue isn't addressed and fixed, you know. So lots of healing that needs to happen globally when it comes to the issue of racism, for sure.
I'm glad you're talking about it within America and South Africa, because those are very, very critical examples. I think anyone who talks about when we look at racism, not like it doesn't go around, it doesn't happen anywhere else, but I think the key ones that really stands out to a lot of people are racism in South Africa and racism in America, and how can we, you know, it's such a broad subject, like, you know, and we initially talked about that. As much as it's still broad, we still need solutions to it. We still need people who are living in those oppression times, so in difficult circumstances, to be able to find hope and joy that this world can be better for them. So I'm so glad that you're still continuing your work, even though previous things happen, but you're not stopped there. You're still finding ways to give back to people and help them understand that they can be joy, they can be ways to make things work. And especially with the campaign, hopefully we could get someone who's more empathetic and more understanding to the pain that they're currently going through. And that will take you on your journey to the dolls, which my daughter beautifully received. I mean, that was just truly amazing. Could you explain to me the initiative behind your dolls and what they truly mean? Because I mean, she loves them and they're so varied. They're different colors and different hairstyles. Just tell me a little bit about them.
Yeah, so I call them Melanin Spectrum dolls, and they come in a set of 5, and they're 5 different skin tones, and all with natural hair, different colors of hair, from blonde to red to brown to black. And the idea is that in 2022, you know, in this modern time here, we have, it's not like every family is segregated in a sense, you know, there's integration, not just in communities, but in families. And so a lot of families have a range of skin tone in siblings and parents and cousins. And Some may be lighter or darker, in between, and some may have blonde hair, brown hair, red hair, black hair. And so to celebrate all of that, to celebrate that sense of belonging together. And I think this really comes from my sense of family being more solid with my siblings, with my Black siblings, my Black adopted siblings when I was in Montana, and not having that same sense of connection with my white parents or my older white brother. And so having that sense of family, and then in Mississippi, again, where I lived, having that sense of family and the Black community there. And, some people would say, well, you don't match the mission. You don't look like, you'd be an NAACP leader, or, you don't fit the box. But in a sense, it never was about my skin tone. It was about that sense of belonging and that sense of commitment to justice and to equity and to healing from pain, and my sister and I both, she's very dark complected, I'm very light complected, but we both share the same pain of being molested by our older brother. And, as one example, but I think that, sometimes we go to the doll store or to the toy store and we look for the doll that matches one child, not thinking about the relationships that child has within their friends and family group may match them, but also others don't match them. And so, to celebrate all of that and not to segregate or resegregate in terms of, toys or dolls or whatever. And I think another part of my inspiration really was the Mamie and Kenneth Clark experiment, which really was the tipping point for desegregation in the US. And so in the Brown versus Board of Education case, it really hinged on what convinced the Supreme Court in the US that segregation actually was harmfully affecting children and led them to desegregate schools was this doll experiment, where children were presented with Black dolls and white dolls and were asked which is the prettier doll, which is the smarter doll, and so on. And their responses showed that segregation was actually psychologically damaging children and institutionalizing, in a sense, the ideas of white supremacy. So that led to desegregation in the US in the 60s. And so dolls are very important, to history, but I think they're also just important as play tools, and sometimes, having them all the same size and kind of, the equality of scale, but with differences. I think it's important. So I really want to, instead of hand sewing all of them, it's just super time consuming. I'm hoping to find a way to mass manufacture them so that I can provide and make available these sets of dolls to a wider variety of kids. And there have been people like preschool owners, people that have used them as an educational tool in a setting where they can kind of, act out different storybooks or whatever with the dolls. And I think they're a great educational tool as well. So
I love them. They're soft and they're cuddly. They're, things that anyone, little kids could hold and sleep with. So they're really nice. And they so it tells a very positive story and tells you, oh, today I want to sleep with this one. Her name is, like, they give them names, and my daughter just loves her. And I love when I see her go holding a white doll, and then she holds a dark doll. She holds a one with a red head. And it's just like, because this is the world we live in, and it's all about embracement, inclusion. It teaches her that diversity, teaches her that we're all different, but but they all look the same but different in their own unique ways. So I'm super glad you did that. So anyone, I know you're not making them a mass production, but anyone looking to get similar things for their girls, where could they get something like that from?
Yeah, so they could actually, I do them on a custom basis. So if they just reach out to me on my website, racheldolezal.com, and request, through the contact form, I can make a set. I actually made just a single custom doll. And I know this doesn't fit with the overall idea of the diversity, but someone did reach out, and her older daughter, who was in her 20s, had passed away of leukemia, and she had cut her daughter's hair. And she sent me the hair and asked me to make a doll with the hair for her little sister, because she had a little sister that was like 8 years old. And so I sewed this doll, and in the same fashion or style as my Melanin Spectrum dolls, and just sewed her hair. And she said that her daughter just sleeps with that doll every day, and it's just like a way for her to have her older sister with her.
Yeah.
So that's very special, and again, still has an angle of helping somebody through pain. It just is a little bit different of an angle, but I think when people have these ideas and feel comfortable reaching out to me, and know that I wouldn't say, oh, why would you do that, or what, I am the last person to judge somebody else, so I try and listen and connect. And so I think I just appreciate that people are comfortable reaching out with something so personal, and letting me, help them have a tool to maybe ease the pain a little bit.
Rachel, before I let you go, I mean, I've really enjoyed talking to you, but could you tell us what next for you? What are your plans? I know you're doing so much. You've written, you're an author, you're a strong activist. You're working on these doors. You're really working on politics in Africa now, because we've seen that as much as it's bad in America, there's also that dampened side in Africa that needs that shining light on. What next from you?
Well, currently I am embarking on the cryptocurrency world. I'm trying to explore how NFTs can actually benefit nonprofits and charity organizations. And so I just launched my first NFT collection of my art, and I'm going to be launching collections and then auctioning off pieces to benefit different charities. And I'm just, this is something new to me, so it may succeed, it may not, but it's kind of exciting. I don't really understand the cryptocurrency world completely, but I have some good friends and hair clients who do. And so I continue to gain from their wisdom, and hope that, one kind of cool thing about cryptocurrency is there's no exchange rate. So it excites me in terms of, even South Africa, that's 16 to 1. The rand is 16 to 1 US dollar, for example. So whereas a Bitcoin would be 1 to 1, around the world, there's no exchange rate. So this could potentially be a tool for communities to leapfrog past the exchange rate and gain more economic access and opportunity and equity. And so I'm really excited about that. I don't know how far I will get personally with it, but I think it's a great frontier. And I also continue to braid hair. I continue to create my art, which is on my website as well, racheldolezal.com. I actually have a couple pieces in an art exhibition currently up in Spokane, Washington. They just opened the Carl Maxey Center. Carl Maxey was a great civil rights attorney, part of Black history in the Pacific Northwest. And I've worked somewhat with his sons, and they just opened the center to honor their father. And many of the activists in that area were instrumental in that. And they reached out and wanted to include me in their exhibition called Our Visions, Our Stories. And so I was honored to have some artwork there. So hopefully more art exhibitions in the future. And also I'm hoping to become more a part of the autism advocacy initiatives here in the US. I know in Arizona, it's been an uphill battle to get services for my son. So I've been trying to understand that process more here. And I don't know where that will lead, but I'm open to, being a voice for, literally, my son doesn't have words. So, I have to be his words. I have to be his advocate. So I'm committed to that.
And we'll probably start calling you Nkechi when next time we'll have this conversation, because it's such a beautiful name. I see it on your on our Zoom call. So I mean, I'm
Yeah.
truly delighted to talk to you about all your work, everything you're doing, and I really hope that we keep this conversation going, because there was so much going on in the world. The racism issue is so huge, and it's not it's not something we could quantify. Even if we start talking about it, there's always opinions about it, which we just have to do the best we can. And I really wish your son the best of luck with all, you being a voice for him. I can imagine how hard it must be for you to have to deal with it. But I'm glad you're really there for him, to help him find his voice, find himself one day. And thank you. Thank you so much for your time. I really enjoyed this talking to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.